Hello, I'm Chiranjib Sengupta, and you're here with me on the Energy Connects podcast. Welcome to the third episode of a very special podcast series brought to you in partnership with Siemens Digital Industry Software. The focus of our episode today is on physics informed neural networks, a powerful emerging tool in the energy industry, and how it can radically alter the way we approach digital transformation. To discuss a lot about this, I'm delighted to welcome our guest for today's episode, John Nixon, Vice President of Global Strategy for Energy, Chemicals and Infrastructure, Mike Houghton, the Global Head of Sales, and Shivdeep Gaagat, Industry Lead for Energy, all of them at Siemens. John, Mike, and Shivdeep, welcome back to the Energy Connects podcast. It's great to see all of you again.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's set the scene first. So, can you please explain in layman's language what are physics-informed neural networks for those who are not really familiar with the term?
I'll take a first crack at this. We hear a lot about neural networks right now, artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks. And when we're training neural networks, with data and associated labels, it's a very data-intensive effort. The beauty is we as a species have already done the hard slogging of figuring out the laws of nature. And so we can take first principles like Newton's laws of motions, conservation laws, and then of course the more complex laws and equations of life that derive from that. We can apply that as part of the learning process so that as you're training a neural network, or in this case a physics-informed neural network, you've now taken life's guardrails, right? And provided that as part of the training process.
Building on what John was saying there, we have all these physics-informed models, and when we overlay them with the likes of AI, which is the overall umbrella of what we're talking about today, is you can easily get hallucinations in the outputs. So if you've got the guardrails of those physics-informed models as a starting position, you can then begin to clamp and sup the hallucinations, as it were, and you can become more predictable with the model itself as you train it. I think that's one of the topics that, some people overlook when they think, oh, we can just throw AI at it. If you just throw AI at things and without those guardrails of, first principle modeling, you can get you least expect.
Yep, building on what you said, Mike. Physics-informed neural networks. So first, I probably can define a little bit what it is, and then go back as to why these things are needed. Why is there a very strong need for these kind of solutions? So the first thing is physics. By all means, in the industry, it's something that is heavy. It takes expertise. It has computational loads. And we have solutions that run computations in weeks and sometimes even months. So one way of actually accelerating that comes through the application of AI in those models. These neural networks can learn from that physics as they solve, and in the end, make something that takes a long time to run, be able to execute fast. Now, what are the advantages of having it execute fast? Is simply because that lowers the barrier for their adoption. It allows them to be used in a fast context wherever you're making decisions, especially in operations. It helps you compensate for data that is biased, especially in the data that you're running labels on. It could be providing synthetic data for your processes, and that's also compensating for all the gaps, for example, a what-if analysis or a path to failure that was not known before. So all these kind of things come to light simply because of application of the guardrails of physics applied to the data.
Those are all excellent points, and thank you for the very comprehensive overview. And now that we know what they are, how can physics-informed neural networks change the way we approach digital transformation in the energy industry, especially in areas like predictive maintenance, energy optimization, and grid reliability?
Shivdeep, I'll let you answer this, but I'll tell you what comes to my mind when asked about this. I think about things like corrosion propagation. I think about fatigue. I think about energy optimization, grid reliability. In my background, when I work a lot with asset integrity, one of the first questions I asked was, how do we calculate mean time to failure? How much life do I have left? And so for me, the promise of a physics-informed neural network or a physics-informed digital twin that emerges from that neural network provides an incredible opportunity for us to really understand in the digital world that we're creating the physical effects of things like corrosion and fatigue long before we have things like a leak, an explosion, safety incidents, and so forth. So for me, to transform digitally our energy, the way we produce it, we consume it, we transport it, the safety associated with it, the reliability, that's a real value of physics-informed neural networks. And I really think that's poised to redefine our abilities in that space.
Absolutely. And especially a lot of problems that were not actually posed before. So because there is something like, if you typically say that if there is no solution, there is no problem, right? In this space, there are new sets of problems emerging that were not considered before, simply because they were either too complex or the fields are too disintegrated, the engineers cannot communicate, etc., etc. So when one of the reasons that was holding this behind a little bit, especially when it comes to really holistically looking at your energy consumption, and this is something that is going to be very powerful in the coming next decade as we look into energy transition, because it's not just going to be about a physics of, let's say, wind turbines or solar or wave or hydrogen or whatever. It's all going to be a mix. There's no silver bullet. And to be successful in that mix, there will be a combination of things that have not been tried before, but we have the right technologies, and physics-informed neural networks as well as physics-informed digital twins form a basis of that. And what do I mean by that? So simply, if you're looking at the stability of the grid, that's one aspect. Is your investment still profitable if you're investing into solar or into renewables, or integrating some of that grid back into something like a battery to grid interaction with the new EVs that we see scaling in the world? So making that profitable, making that financially sustainable would need you to be very clear on what the physics entails in terms of the production capacities, when, where, how, balancing those demands, making sure the availability of systems is high up. Those new paths to failures are known. So everything can be done in this digital way, which really paves the way for a very sustainable energy transition in the future.
Yeah. If I just add a little to this, we're currently executing a project that uses that very technology, Shivdeep. And in this instance, the client has got, they've got wind energy, they've got solar, they've got conventional fossil fuel derived energy, and they've also got the hydrogen facility. And what they're looking to do is get those energy balances together with weather patterns and the likes. And to do this with I'm going to say a standard physics-based model alone would just be huge computational power. Now, allowing them to go to reduced order models and the likes, it allows them to almost run at real time the scenario analysis for what the best course of action might be in these next steps of the cycle, really giving the informing the operations staff, the utility owners, what the best course of actions are. And I'm saying this in a real time, but they can also do this for longer times, where they look at longer term weather patterns, longer term energy sources, look at the different tariff prices they're paying for the different energy sources that are feeding into the grid, and allow them to make those informed decisions using classical methods. The computations would be huge. Allowing them to use these derived methods, as it were, they get a much better outcome in their ability to predict in a reasonable amount of time, because they just take too long to not just computate, but to actually design every parameter in the model.
Thank you for that comparison, Mike. And in terms of the next steps, what would be the biggest practical or technical hurdles, in adopting physics-informed neural networks at scale within the industry? And talking from a Siemens perspective, how are you addressing those challenges?
I would say, in previous discussions, like on the prior episodes that we've had before, we talked about the challenge around clean data, around legacy information, legacy data, making sure that we have integration to legacy systems. There's a foundational component to this with any enterprise as we go forward to first address how we get at that data, how reliable is that data, because now we're going to be training on that data. And so I think that's one of the challenges. The other challenge I hear a lot from customers and potential clients is the talent gap. People that understand both AI and physics or engineering, how to bring that together, how to get value out of this. So you're seeing a change in the kind of job descriptions that customers and clients are looking for, and the type of talent that they need to really draw value out of this. So it's an interesting sea change for our species in what we regard as the necessary intersection of various talents to be able to get the most out of these physics-informed environments that we're creating digitally.
So building on what you mentioned, especially with the new talent, jobs, this is actually it's an opportunity and a challenge, right? So we have a lot of smart workforce who built a lot of methods over the past 50 years, going to retire soon. But we have a new sort of workforce coming in, which is more digitally savvy. Maybe they don't have the same level of experience that, their counterparts. But because of that digital awareness, they're more savvy with Python, they're more quick to code things and more easy to learn things. And that's basically also the direction that we ourselves are developing Siemens in. So it makes it an easy job to actually integrate these technologies, which used to be quite complex in the past, through very clear and simple user interfaces, allowing people or enabling customers to actually get the benefits of these technologies, regardless of their complexity. So really, what we want to help them is to maximize their impact to the business in the most cost-effective way. And since that barrier is something that is stopping these kind of investments, because of that, because of this kind of new technologies and the kind of skill that is coming in, it is also presenting a big opportunity to actually scale these.
Thanks. I think another barrier to adoption is really leadership in a lot of in all of our customers. Have they got the foresight and the entrepreneurial spirits to drive and adopt this technology? That's probably, in my experience, the biggest barrier to adoption. It's a very conservative industry. That's the truth of the matter. Things tend to happen in a very, I'm going to say, systematic and practical approach to the way they've always done things. But with this emerging technology having such a positive impact on the sector, I would say that, the gloves should be off. They should really look across the supply chain and say, who could help us support the adoption of this technology? Because it's ready now, it's available now. And Siemens is just one of a number of suppliers that can answer to that challenge that you ask of the supply chain in terms of driving productivity and competitive edge using such technology. So for me, it's a very simple one, and it's about leadership. Have they got that foresight, that entrepreneurial spirit, that leadership vision to where they want to move to in their organizations? Because the supply chain is out there. We can deliver this, and we're here and ready.
And Mike, as you're talking, and Shivdeep, as you were answering, I'm reminded, Shivdeep, of what you said earlier about computational intensity. And I see that as, that's another hurdle here. But with surrogate models, reduced order, magnitude, edge inferencing, things like that, I think that can help overcome some of the computational intensity challenges. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of takes me back to what Mike said, actually. the technology is already there. We've tested it. We've applied it at customers. We have valid proof points. We have the know-how. What really is going to be the key driver is that leadership, and then that leadership actually trusting for their young workforce or even experienced professionals to actually go implement these technologies. And we don't need to sort of go conquer the world at one go. We really start simple and small, and then build it up into a proper roadmap.
That always reminds me of the phrase culture eats strategy. So Mike, what you're saying is, and Shivdeep, what you're reinforcing is, unless you create a culture within your organization to adopt, address, and to deploy these technologies, you're going to struggle with actual success around these technologies.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. If I look at other sectors, let's say outside of the energy sector, if you look at aerospace or automotive, they've got compelling events where they have a cost base that's continuously moving up, and they have a competition that's driving the price point down. And unless they're driving innovation and adopting new technology to drive competitive edge, they go out of business. That gap gets too big. Now, in the energy sector, it's a bit more conservative, and the compelling events for that competition isn't quite the same. I know a lot of energy markets around the world are opening up more and more to competition, and as they do, it will force the case. But what I would say to the leadership out in the marketplace is, don't wait for that to come. Grab it now and really understand how you can drive productivity, competitive advantage, and I'm going to say innovation to a level they haven't done before using this technology. We've got the physics-based models, we're overlaying it with AI, and I genuinely believe that it's now a leadership barrier, and we need to, help them and guide the leadership about what the art of the possible is, and really, maybe set up the warning signs. So that might not be a good idea, because maybe the technology isn't evolved enough in one area, but there's many areas where that technology is readily available, as Shivdeep said. We've been doing this for some time now.
I think all of them excellent points. And I think, like you said, Mike, beautifully put, the gloves should be off at this point. And then, John, like you said, culture eats strategy. Now, going back to an earlier point that you all made, about the impact. Now, are there specific areas or applications where you see physics-informed neural networks giving the industry a competitive edge over traditional AI or simulation methods?
So, Shivdeep, we've talked about this before, low data, high physics, right? So there's a need at times to create synthetic data. And there's, we're working in an environment that has well-defined physics, partial differential equations, airflow and things like that, looking at heat distribution. And so when you combine what data you do have with the guardrails of physics, we have a much better opportunity to outperform, quote unquote, traditional AI as you're posing that question going forward. The other thing I look at and consider when you ask about outperforming or a strategic advantage over traditional AI is speed and adaptability, right? The ability, as we said earlier, to overcome the computational intensity of traditional AI going forward. Shivdeep, I've heard you talk about this on many occasions, and as you were just talking about now, we've applied this at customers. The technology's there, and physics-informed neural networks, which lead to physics-informed digital twins, far outperform traditional AI, which is so data intensive, which in the real world of energy, sometimes we don't have all that data.
Absolutely. And to make the point again, the AI left on itself can hallucinate. And you don't, it's
Absolutely.
true. And you don't want all sorts of alarms going off in your plant. It's just because the AI model thought something was a good idea. So there is, again, there's benefits to AI. I'm not saying it's not useful. It's super useful. And it's super powerful as well. And similarly, there are benefits to simulation. It's super complex, super useful. But when you actually marry these two technologies, a lot more areas become addressable that were earlier not being addressed. And if you go a step further, because of that speed and efficacy, combining that with real-time decision making, factoring in your financials, for example, because typically in the financials and engineering, I don't imagine these two groups to even come together in the same room and talk for more than 5 minutes. However, if there is a process, there's an automated way of working where safety constraints and financial constraints come together to find out new process operating parameters or new scenarios, or to figure out a certain new path to a failure. These are things that were not possible before. And through that, because of the nature of the way the problem is posed, it will always, most likely always, give you an improvement over a baseline, simply because it's posed as an optimization problem.
And Shivdeep, a couple things that pop into my head as you're talking. You mentioned the hallucinations as one of your first points. That tendency for an overfit that you would get from traditional AI, where it always wants to give you an answer, and so it'll take what it had been trained on and had memorized and try to. And when you have an unknown that comes up, and Mother Nature always throws an unknown curveball when it comes to operations of assets. We're always in a war of oxidation. And so traditional AI is not well equipped for that until you bring in now this physics-informed backbone, if you will, and provided the guardrails that necessarily will be able to handle the unknown, the unexpected as it comes forward in that regard. So when we look at also your second point around the financials as well as now the physics-informed, I find that very exciting. You're making a very good point. With a physics-informed neural network, with a physics-informed digital twin, you now have the opportunity to bring, as we said earlier, you connect all of these legacy systems, all these incumbent systems that exist in an enterprise. Now with this emerging, I would almost say physics-informed industrial metaverse for an enterprise that is now coming to light, you can look at the smallest tweaks in the performance of equipment and understand actual balance sheet implications from that. It really becomes a system of systems, a model-based financial optimization for an enterprise. And I hadn't thought about that when we were first going into this conversation. I was really kind of hyper-focused on the physics-informed neural network aspect of it, but you're right. With that at the heart of our systems, this very intelligent neural network, the implications, though, are very wide and very deep for an enterprise.
Just to conclude that, maybe it's the fact that in the end, they're all corporate entities. So it boils down really to the money. And because of this connectivity between what the cost implication would be of certain changes that are made somewhere upstream in the system, having that clarity for any senior leadership is something that is very critical and is going to be a kind of make or break in the future.
Yep. Excellent point there. And looking 5 to 10 years ahead, where do you think physics-informed neural networks will have the most significant impact in strategic energy initiatives?
For me, I think about, we've always got this vision of self-healing grids, AI augmented control systems, digital twins that continuously learn and adapt. It's always difficult to have a crystal ball and look at the next decade. As an example, many people wouldn't have thought that with the rise of AI, thus the rise of data centers, we would thus have a nuclear renaissance that would occur globally because of it. Just weeks ago, I think the World Economic Fund removed all prohibitions on nuclear project investments, for example. So the sea change that occurs over a very short period of time, like a half a decade or a decade, it's very hard to predict. But I will say that the work we've seen and the success we've seen with our clients in nuclear, in oil and gas, in renewable energy, in the use of AI, training that AI, applying the physics-based guardrails that we're talking about here, I can see a world where we can deeply simulate and an entire system, for example, of like interprovincial or interstate pipelines and so forth. And we're doing that today, actually, and understand the implications of I've decided to add, for example, a drag reducing agent into the pipeline versus more pumping power because of the rates of power that are being charged at a certain time of the day from a utility. And how does that all balance out? How do I balance that on a nationwide interstate pipeline system? And how do I create that environment and then allow it to, in an automated way, balance out and drive, as you said, earlier, Shivdeep, these are corporations. They're looking to maximize their profitability. In that case, that physics informed and that neural network that is looking at the entire interstate or interprovincial pipeline system is now driving enterprise-wide balance sheet, performance. And so in the next 5 to 10 years, while that is a vision and is emerging now, in 5 to 10 years, that will be expected. So it's funny how things that we always regard as, oh my gosh, this is going to be breakthrough and it'll be interesting, then become part of the everyday. And it's like, well, that's at least what I should be able to get out of this investment.
When I think about how physics-informed neural networks will affect the business in the next 5 to 10 years, I actually think it across the whole value chain. I think it's really going to help us with our conceptual designs, our detailed designs. I think it's going to offer us guardrails where we can make sure we're designing very safe systems, and we're also optimizing those systems against CapEx and OpEx requirements in the future. As you start to unravel the connection between the financials, whether they be OpEx or CapEx, you can see how that all comes together. And then when you move into the operational space and the maintenance space, I can see this as well. These models and these digital twins moving into the executable phase, you can see a future vision where your reliance on, should we say, human error gets less and less, and your reliance on these physics-based neural networks to give you the best decision at that time with that data set is available across the entire life cycle. And no, I'm not talking about we're going to diskill our entire organizations. That's not what it's about. But we're just giving those skilled people the opportunity to make the best decisions, almost like having a PhD or a professor sat on everyone's shoulder associated with that design. And when it comes to that operator, that operation staff can produce the golden batch, as it were. They can produce the best operating points for that facility at any one time using those models. That's the way I see it. I think the impact is tremendous.
Absolutely. And since you bring up those topics, Mike, so there's design and then there's operations. So, and exactly when we were talking about design, I think because of this, different disciplines of designs will come together. A lot of know-how that is developed today in R&D teams and engineering teams is typically project specific. And it's sort of once the engineer is signed off, it just sort of rots there in a digital dump. And whereas there are people in the operations who would love to have that information, the whole process currently is like you have a raise request, then it gets processed. By the time it reaches the engineer who can actually solve it, I think only 5 to 8% of those requests actually make it through. 90% of the time, it's practical, hands-on, on-the-moment, on-spot decision-making, which the industry is actually perfected for the last 40 to 50 years. And that goes back to the point, if it's working, don't touch it. So it's highly risk-averse, and we understand why it's highly risk-averse, but it cannot stay on like this. So that is going to change. And precisely as you mentioned, there's going to be fewer and fewer reliance on these methods that were developed simply because there will be a more clear understanding of the data. There will be more contextualization of that data. There will be contextualization of the safety aspects and the profitability aspect, and combining all of those decisions in real time will be most likely automated, or at least if it has to have a human in the loop, it would be something like a PhD, double PhD professor sitting on top of someone's shoulders, like nudging, like, okay, do this, not what was doing before, simply because it worked. So a lot of status quo modus operandis would be challenged, and that's actually a good thing. And because of that, the enormous, gigantic costs of designs, and Johnny mentioned nuclear, and it's getting the plant up and running, getting through the regulators, all of that. All the regulations were developed somewhere in the 70s and 80s. But as we see things moving in the latest era, a lot of that testing, a lot of that regulation, even certification and acceptance is being based on validated physics-based models, which brings to the point that plants of the future are going to be built very, very fast because there's going to be less number of iterations. The problem of over-design, which is severely unaddressed across the entire ecosystem, is something that is going to be highlighted through these mix. There will be integration of disciplines, so everyone would know what each other is talking about, and we have our solutions basically which enable customers giving that digital backbone across the simulation board, across the grid management and everything. So we have data backbones to bring it all together, and in the end, what the impact is, a nuclear plant, for example, or any plant in the future would be built with much less time and effort as compared to what it was. It would be operated in a much more efficient way, based simply on and much more safely based on the guidelines that are provided by the physics.
Can I just add one more point to this? Because this is a really, really interesting point you make there. Is as you think about this physics-based neural networks and supporting the whole life cycle from design through to detailed design, implementation, operations, and the maintenance. What that's allowing us to do is contextualize data across the entire life cycle and make that available via the digital threads. And that really is going to unlock a lot of value in future. So the decisions that you made very early in the design cycle are actually not lost, but made available right the way through the entire life cycle, through to maintenance. And that allows you, and this is something that's very often not addressed I think, in the correct manner, is to make sure the design has got that maintenance and sustainability focus in mind. It's not a silo. We don't throw the data over the fence. We're actually thinking about the entire through life cycle value that we create. And that contextualized data is something that's so important. And these neural networks are going to help us ensure that we capture that data and we make it available to every stage of the life cycle of the asset.
And as you, Mike, you and Shivdeep are talking about this, the question is what does it look like in the next 5 to 10 years? I think we see now these changes are occurring not over 5 to 10 years, which has been kind of intrinsic to our species. We always think about things changing in the next decade. What were the 80s like? What were the 90s like? That kind of thing. I actually think the question, as you two are talking, can be tailored to what do you predict will happen in the next 2 years? In the next 2 or 3 years, because the dramatic shifts we're seeing are accelerating. So it's exciting to look at the next 10, but as you're talking, these are things that are happening right now that we'll feel the effects of in the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months.
We've got elements of what we're discussing right now, not just being thought about, but being delivered to clients. So it's happening now. And what I would say to any leaders listening to this broadcast is, if you're not taking advantage of this now, please reach out and start taking advantage. Otherwise, run the risk of being left behind.
That's a very strong message from you, Mike. And the key to turning that vision that we all spoke about, and that was a great discussion, the key to turning that vision into reality would be, I think, integration and adoption. So my next question to you would be that, how can the industry best integrate physics-informed neural networks into existing digital ecosystems to accelerate adoption and maximize business value?
We often hear leaders talk about getting back to first principles, making sure that we account for the simplest things. When you get on this journey, you have to have a strategy. And Mike had said it earlier. You've got to have a culture for this first and foremost. You have to lead from the front, that we're going to adopt and address physics-informed neural networks and the advantages they'll provide us. And we're going to do the work necessary to lay the groundwork for success. So we're going to account for our data, make sure we have clean data, the data that we do have. We're going to integrate to incumbent systems. We're going to automate the mundane, and we're going to focus in on this physics-informed neural network once we have those first steps established. And at Siemens, we've done this for clients again and again and again, where we've come in and provided that transformation at the most fundamental level for an enterprise. We work a lot with systems integrators and partners in this effort too, because you have to change the culture. You have to optimize business processes to take full advantage of the digital, which means you have to rethink the way in which you do work, where you take humans out of some loops, but you put humans in other loops. So it's this changing environment within an enterprise and the basics around that change that you need to address. And then when you start to implement physics-informed neural networks, it's not always, and Shivdeep, correct me on this, but what I've seen is it doesn't necessarily have to be this monolithic, massive neural network. You can address, or you can, let's say, focus your efforts on a system, a subsystem, or a system of systems. Like, for example, you might look at your boilers, you might look at your heat exchangers. You may then apply that to a larger steam supply system. So, you can start in a more modular way with what you target your physics and computational power on to get the most value out of it. And then I think in a more modular fashion, you can continue to expand into the larger system. Shivdeep, would you agree with that? Or yeah?
Absolutely. So I think, and then maybe I'll address one of the reasons, what's typically the concern, why would someone not do it? And the answer is typically, it might be too disruptive. Right?
Okay.
And that's what I want to address, because this is not at all disruptive in the sense that it's actually just adding more value without disturbing anything at all. So, and as you mentioned, John, I mean, it's not a big monolith. And that's why, as I also said before, we don't have to go out and conquer the world. It's very small wins we can start with, but it needs to be strategic. It needs to have a roadmap behind it. So as to where do we start and where do we get to? How do we address any kind of challenges that we see over the way? And really, and identifying those quick wins is the easiest bit to start with. That's something that we, and I think that's something uniquely there about Siemens, because we're not there to just sort of sell a big vision, but rather partner with our customers to understand the challenges, to really identify where it has the highest possible impact or the lowest possible effort. And once you have that trust validated from that kind of an approach, you can look at scaling it further. You can onboard more people, and people is very important here, because even as a leader, it will always be very important to take people along and integrate that with the latest and best of technologies. Yeah.
And I'd say one other topic I'd just add to what you've said there, Shivdeep, is that, when we look at all these models that we derive for our clients, we always put a financial benefit behind this. We try to peel it right back to, okay, why are we doing this? What are the advantages? And we've got a whole set of models that are supported by financial data as well, for how they can impact, improve operations, better quality, better safety regimes, etc., etc. So, the models extend much further than, your actual plant and process. We can actually take them right back into a process environment where we're then converting that into a dollar sign for what it means to the enterprise moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this fantastic discussion on physics-informed neural networks. And I think we end this episode and look forward to the next episode of this very special series brought to you in partnership with Siemens Digital Industry Software. Thank you very much, John, Shivdeep, and Mike, for your insights. And it's a pleasure, as always, to speak to you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for joining, and I hope you really enjoyed this episode. You can get the 2 previous episodes of this special series and comprehensive coverage of the energy industry at energyconnect.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and I will be back with the series finale, the final episode of this very special series, brought to you in partnership with Siemens Digital Industry Software. Until then, goodbye.